You ever see that movie Passengers?
Oh, yeah, with Chris Pratt?
Yeah. The one where he gets woken up from hypersleep like 90 years early?
Yeah, yikes. That's a rough way to start a space voyage.
No kidding. But it got me thinking, you know, is human hibernation even possible? Or is that pure Hollywood?
Well, it's a question that scientists have been trying to answer for decades. And it turns out the answer is more complicated than you might think. And when we've got research papers, some pretty intriguing historical hints, even some real-life stories that make you wonder if maybe, just maybe, it's not as far out there as it sounds.
Okay, so we're on a mission here to separate fact from fiction. But before we get into all that, why should we even care if humans could hibernate? Like, what's the big deal?
Well, imagine this. Someone's been in a terrible accident, life-threatening injuries. But what if you could put them in suspended animation? Buy the doctors more time to treat them.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Or picture astronauts sleeping through those long hauls to Mars.
Sure.
Bypass all the physical and psychological stress of space travel.
Okay, that's starting to sound less like science fiction and more, like you said, some kind of medical marvel.
Right.
But let's back up for a sec. When we talk about hibernation, we're not talking about just a really long nap, are we?
No. It's way more than that. True hibernation. We're talking about the body's metabolism slowing down dramatically, like a reduction in energy use by, get this, up to 98%.
98%. Wow.
Body temperature drops, breathing slows way down, heart rate decreases. It's like hitting the ultimate pause button on your whole system.
That sounds intense. Is that even safe for humans to do? I mean, really?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yep.
Because our bodies, they're designed to maintain a very specific internal environment. So messing with something as basic as our core temperature, that's risky business. But there are some fascinating clues that suggest humans might have a hidden potential for hibernation.
Clues like what? What kind of clues?
Well, let's go back in time, way back, about 400,000 years. There's this cave in Spain called Cima de los Huesos.
Okay.
And inside, archaeologists found a ton of ancient bones. They think these fossils are from our Neanderthal cousins, and they show some unusual bone growth patterns.
Unusual how?
Okay, so picture this. You're looking at these bones and you see these distinct lines, almost like rings on a tree trunk. And these lines, they indicate periods of interrupted growth.
I'm trying to picture this, yeah.
And here's the kicker. These patterns are incredibly similar to those found in the bones of, you guessed it, hibernating animals.
So are we talking about Neanderthals, like, snoozing through those brutal Ice Age winters?
It's a theory that's gaining traction. And those fossils, along with other evidence, suggest that our ancient relatives might have actually used hibernation as a way to survive those harsh conditions.
Wow. Okay, so our ancestors might have been secret hibernators. But besides surviving an ice age, what's the connection to, say, living longer?
Here's where it gets really interesting. Scientists have started to notice a pattern. A lot of animals that live a long time, they also happen to be hibernators. And research shows that the ability to hibernate evolved millions of years ago, way back in our very distant mammalian ancestors.
Hold on, are you saying we might have inherited the genes for hibernation?
It's a possibility that's got the scientific community buzzing. Because if we could figure out how to switch those genes back on, who knows what kind of impact it could have on human lifespan.
So we might have this ancient blueprint for hibernation tucked away in our DNA. But even if we could, safely activate it, wouldn't hibernating for months on end turn our muscles to mush and make our bones brittle?
That's what you'd think, right? But here's another fascinating twist. Hibernating animals, they don't experience the muscle wasting or bone loss that you'd expect from being inactive for so long. In fact, they seem to maintain their physical condition remarkably well.
Wait, how is that even possible? I mean, if they're basically immobile for months, shouldn't they be losing muscle and bone density?
That's the big mystery scientists are working on. It seems that during hibernation, these animals go through a bunch of physiological changes that protect their muscles and bones.
So they're not just lying dormant, they're actively protecting their bodies.
Interesting. What are scientists learning from this that could actually help humans?
The implications are huge. Imagine being able to prevent muscle atrophy in patients who are bedridden or recovering from injuries.
Yeah.
Or think about astronauts on those long-duration space missions. Being able to maintain bone density in microgravity. That would be a game changer.
Okay, hibernation sounding less like a winter nap and more like a medical superpower at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But if we could actually pull this off, wouldn't there be some serious risks involved? I mean, we're not exactly designed to just drop our body temperature like a hibernating ground squirrel, are we?
You're not wrong. It's not that simple. And one of the biggest concerns is blood clotting. When your blood flow slows down like it does in hibernation, the risk of clots forming goes way up.
So it's not just about figuring out how to make hibernation happen, it's about making it safe, too. Are there any promising leads on that front? Actually, yes. In 2014, researchers made a pretty big breakthrough while studying hibernating animals. They found that these animals have a unique way of regulating their platelets, the tiny cells that are responsible for clotting.
So they've found a way to prevent blood clots even in a state of hibernation. That's incredible.
It's a crucial piece of the puzzle, and it's just one example of how scientists are looking to the animal kingdom for clues on how to make human hibernation a reality.
This is all getting pretty complex. Before we get into any more details, let's take a step back and remind ourselves exactly what's going on in the brain during hibernation. I mean, it's not like these hibernating animals are just dreaming the winter away, right?
Exactly. What happens in the brain during hibernation is one of the most fascinating parts of this whole phenomenon. And it's where those ground squirrels you mentioned earlier come in.
Ground squirrels, what do they have to do with human hibernation?
Well, researchers have discovered that when ground squirrels hibernate, their brain cells actually shrink.
They shrink.
Yeah. It sounds kind of alarming, but here's the amazing part. When they wake up, their neurons not only go back to their normal size, they actually bounce back even stronger than before.
So it's like a brain reboot. They're hitting the reset button on their neurons.
Exactly. And the key to this incredible regenerative ability seems to be a protein called tau.
Wait, tau, isn't that the protein that's implicated in Alzheimer's disease?
Yes, the very same. You see, in Alzheimer's disease, tau proteins clump together, forming these tangles that disrupt brain function. But in hibernating ground squirrels, tau seems to play a protective role, helping the brain recover from the shrinkage it goes through during hibernation.
So if scientists could figure out how hibernating animals control tau, could that lead to new treatments for Alzheimer's?
That's the hope. By understanding the mechanisms that allow hibernators to protect their brains, we might be able to develop therapies that prevent or even reverse the damage caused by Alzheimer's.
That's amazing. It's like the key to unlocking human hibernation could also hold the key to treating one of the most devastating diseases we face today.
It really shows you how interconnected nature is and the incredible potential that's out there just waiting for us to unlock the secrets of the animal kingdom. But there's another fascinating angle to hibernation that we haven't even touched on yet. Its potential to totally revolutionize organ transplantation.
Oh, right. I've heard about that. Something about preserving organs for longer.
That's right. One of the biggest challenges in organ transplantation is keeping those organs viable while they're being transported. But during hibernation, cells and tissues can survive in super cold temperatures, way colder than we thought possible.
So if we could replicate that in human organs, it could be life-saving for people waiting for transplants.
Exactly. It could mean so many more organs available for transplants, and it could make organ donation possible across much greater distances, saving countless lives.
This is starting to sound less like science fiction and more like science fact. But before we get too carried away with all the potential benefits, let's talk about what could go wrong. Messing with something as fundamental as human metabolism, it just seems inherently risky, right?
You're right to be cautious. Inducing hibernation in a human being, it's a really complex undertaking, and there are definitely risks involved. As we talked about earlier, controlling body temperature is key. Dropping it too low or too quickly could be fatal.
So it's not just about flipping a switch and putting someone into hibernation. It's about finding a way to do it safely and effectively.
Exactly. And that takes a really deep understanding of all the complex physiological changes that happen during hibernation. It's not just about inducing sleep. It's about orchestrating a whole symphony of metabolic, hormonal, and neurological changes that allow the body to function in a completely different way.
So we're talking about a delicate balance, a really finely tuned system that we're just starting to understand. But are there any hints that humans might actually be capable of this? Or are we talking about something that's just fundamentally impossible for our species?
Well, there's a fascinating case that suggests we might be seeing glimpses of human hibernation already, even without realizing it.
Really? Tell me more.
There's this incredible story of Mitsutaka Uchikoshi, a Japanese man who survived for 24 days unconscious after a hiking accident. He had a broken pelvis, no food or water, and he still pulled through.
24 days without food or water? That's unbelievable. How is that even possible?
Some experts think he might have gone into a form of accidental hibernation. His body basically shut down to conserve energy, allowing him to survive against all odds.
So it's like his body instinctively tapped into some ancient survival mechanism.
That's the theory, and it makes you wonder if our bodies can do this unintentionally. Could we learn to induce this state in a controlled and safe way?
That's a question for our next segment. So we've got ancient Neanderthals maybe sleeping through ice ages, a Japanese hiker surviving for weeks in a near-death state, and those amazing ground squirrels teaching us about brain resilience. I'm starting to think human hibernation might not be such a far-fetched idea after all.
It's not just about surviving extreme conditions or living longer either. There's another potential benefit that's got scientists really excited: the possibility of revolutionizing space travel.
Oh, right, the whole passenger scenario. But instead of being accidentally woken up 90 years early, astronauts could intentionally spend those long interstellar journeys in suspended animation.
Exactly. Think about it. No need for huge amounts of food, water, or oxygen. No bone loss or muscle atrophy from years in microgravity. And maybe most importantly, no psychological toll from being isolated and confined on a long-duration space mission.
Yeah, that's a pretty compelling case. We could finally send humans to those distant stars we've always dreamed of reaching. But let's be real, there are bound to be some major hurdles to overcome before we're sending astronauts off to hibernate on a spaceship.
Absolutely. One of the biggest challenges is figuring out how to induce and control hibernation in a human being safely and reliably. Like we said before, we can't just crank down the thermostat and expect everything to be fine.
Right, we're talking about a complex interplay of metabolic, hormonal, and neurological changes that we're only beginning to understand. But haven't there been some experiments with inducing hibernation-like states in humans? What about that 2010 study on deep meditation that you mentioned earlier?
Yes, that study was really interesting. Researchers found that people who were experienced in deep meditation could significantly reduce their metabolic rate, almost like they were entering a hibernation-like state.
So ancient meditation techniques could hold clues to unlocking our hidden hibernation abilities. That's fascinating. But even if we could safely induce this state, wouldn't it be a pretty bizarre experience? I mean, what would it even feel like to be in suspended animation?
That's a great question, and unfortunately, we don't have any firsthand accounts from humans who have experienced true hibernation. We can only speculate based on what we know from animal studies.
So what do we know? Do those hibernating animals just sort of court to switch off completely?
It's not quite that simple. While their brain activity is significantly reduced, they're not completely unconscious. They still cycle through different sleep stages, and they could even wake up for a bit if their environment changes too much.
So it's not like flipping a switch and turning them off. They're still aware on some level. But what about when they wake up? Do they feel groggy or disoriented? Imagine waking up after months of hibernation. You'd probably need a serious cup of coffee to get going.
Actually, hibernating animals seem to wake up pretty quickly and go back to their normal activities without any problems. It's as if their bodies just pick up where they left off, with no lingering grogginess or confusion.
Wow, that's amazing. Their bodies just seamlessly transition between these two totally different states of being. But I have to admit, the whole idea of intentionally putting someone into suspended animation, even for a good reason like space travel, feels a bit ethically ambiguous.
You've raised a really important point. The ethics of human hibernation are complex, and there are a lot of factors to consider. For example, who gets to decide who hibernates and for how long? What are the long-term psychological effects? And what about the impact on society if we could potentially extend human lifespans by a lot?
It's a lot to think about. We'd be essentially messing with one of life's most fundamental processes, the passage of time.
Exactly. And like with any powerful technology, we need to be careful and have serious discussions about the potential benefits and risks before we even think about using it on a large scale.
So we've explored potential benefits, the scientific challenges, and even some of the ethical dilemmas surrounding human hibernation. But before we wrap up, I'm curious about something. We've talked a lot about what happens to the body during hibernation, but what about the mind? What happens to our thoughts, our memories, our sense of self when we're in that suspended state?
That's a question that's been puzzling philosophers and scientists for centuries. We know that during hibernation, brain activity slows down a lot. But what does that mean for our conscious experience? Are we still aware on some level, even if it's not the same kind of awareness we have when we're awake?
It's mind-boggling to think about. Are we essentially putting our consciousness on hold? Do we dream during hibernation? Do we age mentally, even if our bodies aren't aging physically?
These are all fascinating questions, and we don't have the answers yet. Some researchers think that studying the brain activity of hibernating animals could help us understand consciousness itself. Others believe that hibernation might give us a unique opportunity to explore the line between life and death, as the body enters a state that's similar to death in many ways, but can still come back to life.
It's like we're venturing into uncharted territory, not just scientifically, but also in how we understand what it means to be human. The idea that we might be able to control time itself, to pause our lives and restart them whenever we want, raises really deep questions about our place in the universe and the very nature of our existence.
And those questions are worth thinking about, even if we never actually achieve human hibernation. The pursuit of knowledge, exploring the unknown, these are things that make our lives richer and broaden our horizons, no matter what the outcome is.
Wow, we've covered so much in this deep dive. Ancient Neanderthals, cutting-edge research, and all this incredible potential for the future.
Yeah, it's really mind-blowing to think that manipulating something as fundamental as time might actually be possible.
I know, right? From wondering if human hibernation is even possible to exploring all these implications for humanity, it's incredible how science keeps pushing the boundaries of what we thought we knew.
It all started with the simple question, can humans hibernate? And that question has taken us on this amazing journey, uncovering clues from the past, exploring new research, and considering all the ethical complexities.
So for our listeners out there who are just as fascinated by this topic as we are, what's one key takeaway you'd like them to remember from our deep dive?
That's a good question. I'd say never underestimate the power of nature. Sometimes the answers to some of our biggest challenges might be right in front of us, just waiting to be discovered. And when it comes to human potential, it seems like we've only just scratched the surface.
I love that. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder. Imagine a future where human hibernation is a reality. What would you do with that extra time? Would you explore the depths of space, dedicate yourself to a lifelong passion, or just cherish those precious moments with loved ones? The possibilities are endless, and the choice, ultimately, is yours.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.